we'll switch things up and I'll go this way. And then I'll just get to juggle the books when I pull those out. So there we go. All right. Well, there was a young man, that had set out on a journey. He was going on a cross-country journey in his car. He was going on a road trip to visit his brother. And his brother had gone off to college, so he was really excited to go on this trip. He'd been traveling for about a day or so when all of a sudden his car broke down. Well, we've all been in that situation, right? Your car breaks down, you're in the middle of nowhere, and you're not really sure what to do. And that was, of course, I just have to preface this by saying that was before we had these things. So it's a whole nother level of mess that this young man is trapped in. And all of a sudden he looks up, and in the distance, he sees a monastery. And so he goes up to the monastery, knocks on the door, and the monk answers, and he says, well, could you help me? My car broke down. And the monk said, of course, come on in. He says, well, I just need kind of a place to stay. And the monks take him in, they feed him. They even let him stay overnight. They fix his car for him. But in the middle of the night, this man hears the most strange and wonderful sound that he's ever heard in his life. And he can't quite put his finger on what it is, but he knows, he has to know what this sound is, what made this noise. And so when he wakes up the next morning, the monks are there, they're kind of getting him ready to leave, and he says, well, could you just tell me what the source of that sound was? And the monks look at him and they go, we're sorry. We can't tell you. You're not a monk. And so the man understands and he moves on his way. Well, a few years pass and the same man is traveling down the same road and the car breaks down again. And we know in Unity what this is, right? This is called divine order. So he goes back up to the monastery, and again, the monks help him. They take him in, they fix his car, they feed him, and in the middle of the night, he hears the exact same sound. And so he goes to the monks the next morning, he goes, please, brothers, you have to tell me what is the source of this sound. And they kind of smile to each other and go, we're sorry, you're just not a monk. We cannot tell you. And so exasperated, he goes, oh, what do I have to do? I'll become a monk. What do I need to do to become a monk? And so they tell him, okay, in order to join our order, you must search the earth and come back and tell us how many blades of grass exist upon this earth and how many grains of sand there are upon the entire earth. And so the man kind of, okay. And he sets out on his journey. Now, we'll get back to him later, but what I love about this story is this idea of the spiritual journey, this idea of the quest to find the source of that thing that has been calling to us. And it's not so different than the journey we all go on, that journey to find God, to find spirit, to find the divine. The question is, do we really know what it is that we're looking for when we're out there looking for the divine? Do we really understand what it is we're trying to seek? Because it's been my experience that almost any time when we try to define God, we've limited it. Right? The moment that we say God is this, well, then that means that God can't be that. And yet at the same time, we're saying, well, God is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-everything. If we say God is this big, round sphere of love and joy, well, can God not be outside that sphere of love and joy? So we get limited by our concepts of what and trying to use language. And we've had spiritual masters come to teach us about what this presence is, how we engage with it, how we work with it. But here's the thing. Your spiritual journey is ultimately going to be an individual one. And that's where we kind of get tripped up. We want somebody to take us there. We want somebody to show us, come on, I'll take you, come with me. And as a spiritual leader, I can't do that. I can point you in the direction. I can stand by and support you. I can say, yeah, look at this text or try this practice. And it's my joy to do those things. But a spiritual journey is one that has to be undertaken individually. Now, I'm going to let you in all in on a little secret here. Now, just know that I'm not the first one to come up with this, but we all seem to forget this, no matter how many spiritual masters come to teach us. So are we ready, live streamers? Okay. The secret to life, the secret to our existence, is that we are here to be and express the presence of God. To be and express the love, the light, the joy, the peace of the divine into our world. And like Reverend Erin said earlier when she was talking about the astronauts, that it goes beyond religion. This goes beyond religion. This goes far beyond it. This is about our ability to truly be and express spirit. So now we have the issue of how are we to be and express spirit after I just told you that God is really undefinable. So how do we express that which is undefinable? Well, we have had countless masters come to teach us and to show us and to point us in the direction. The issue is, I think a lot of times what we do is we confuse those masters, and we confuse what they're doing. They're trying to point us the way with the actual message that, we start to worship the master and the teacher, and we forget to look for what they're pointing us to. Some of you have heard me say before the analogy of the finger pointing to the moon. And that all of our sacred texts, all of our wisdom is like a finger pointing up to the moon, and the moon is spirit and God. And instead of looking at the moon and going, wow, look at that, we go, what a cool finger. Have you seen a finger like this guy's before? It's amazing. Instead of realizing it's pointing us to a greater truth within. And we do the same thing with these books. We find texts and books and we think, this is it. This book right here has every answer for who I'm supposed to be, how I'm supposed to be, how I'm supposed to interact with God. Instead of realizing that this book contains the wisdom of other people. It contains a roadmap. It contains clues and guides and suggestions for how we can interact with the divine. And there's one section in particular that I'm going to want to show or share with you today. So let's see. We're going to juggle a microphone here. And this comes from 1 Kings. It's in the Hebrew Scriptures, 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 11 and 12. And if you're not familiar with Hebrew Scriptures, we used to formerly call it the Old Testament until we realized that might be demeaning to our Jewish brothers and sisters that are saying, your Scriptures are old and therefore not any good anymore. So we now try to call them the Hebrew Scriptures and Christian Scriptures. So this is the Hebrew Scriptures. And this is what the author wrote. He wrote that he said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence." After the fire, a sound of sheer silence. You see, what the scholars believe is that this author was introducing a new concept into our consciousness about what God is. Up to this point in the Hebrew Scriptures, when we hear stories about the divine, what we hear are these stories of these massive displays of power, earthquakes and floods, and this group made God angry, and so they've been smited. And then he parts the Red Sea so that the Israelites can get away from the Egyptians. These awesome displays of power. But what this author is saying is that God isn't in those displays of power. That the divine may have been present for the earthquake. It may have been present for the flood. It may have been supportive of the Israelites getting out. But God was not in those things. God was found in the silence that came after. A lot of times we look at stuff that happens in our world and we go, how did that happen? Where was God? The answer is that God was in the silence that came after. The divine was in the silence and the people that showed up after. This was a radical concept to the people at this time. It's a radical concept to a lot of us. So where do we find spirit? We're on our journey. We've heard a strange and wonderful sound. Where do we find God? In the silence. We find it in the silence. And this is not necessarily a new concept in unity. Our co-founder, Mr. Fillmore, oftentimes went into the silence. Last week you heard Reverend Erin talk about Mr. Fillmore going to headquarters, going into silent meditation to simply listen. This is not time spent affirming in prayer. This is not time spent beseeching God for your good. This is time simply being quiet and listening. This is what Mr. Fillmore had to say about what the silence meant and what it was that he was looking for. Really glad I know how to juggle. Maybe someday I'll do that too. Hi. So this is what it says in the Revealing Word. It says, the silence is a state of consciousness entered into for the purpose of putting man or mankind in touch with divine mind so that the soul may listen to the still small voice. It's the process of putting yourself in connection with divine mind, with the divinity. And so how do we do that? Well, I'll tell you how I do it. The way that has always worked for me is meditation. Is silent meditation. People ask me a lot, well, what is your prayer practice? What does that look like? What do you do? How do you pray? How do you meditate? And so here's what I do. I have my little meditation chair. That's not really important, but it helps my body say, you're meditating now. So I sit in that chair, my body relaxes. The first thing you want to do is relax. It's really hard to get focused and hear the silence if you're all like tense. There's a reason nobody ever starts a meditation by saying, get uncomfortable where you are. So you relax your body. And then I start doing a thing where I'm focusing my thoughts. And I do that, the mantra I use, the statement I use to do that is peace, be still. Use whatever works for you. One of my favorite spiritual teachers, Joel Goldsmith, instructed people to count. And just start counting. Count your breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's no magic in the words. What you're doing is you're stilling your mind. And eventually, you find yourself in that still small voice. You see the wind, the earthquakes, the fire, the floods, all of those things represent that noise in your mind that you're trying to clear when you're meditating. And God is not in those things, right? God is in the silence that comes after. So if you notice that noise rising back up again, you just go back to counting, or peace be still. And then we come out of it and just thank you, God. Thank you, Spirit. But the real key to this is that you're spending time in the silence. That's not time asking, beseeching, stating affirmations. It's true stillness. And when you come out of that after a while, you realize that you begin to find the answers on your journey. Just like our friend from earlier. Do you remember him? The one that had traveled all over the world. Well, 45 years later, if you were wondering how long it takes to count blades of grass and grains of sand, 45 years, he hobbles his way up, knocks on the door of the monastery. The monks answer, and he says, there are 352,182,293,872 blades of grass upon the earth. And the monk just kind of nods. And he goes, and there are 459 quadrillion, 378 billion, 293 trillion. There's a reason I'm a minister, not a math major. 694,283,125 grains of sand upon the face of this earth. And the monks smile and go, congratulations, brother, you are now a monk. And they invite him in. And he goes, now can I please find the source of that sound? And they go, yes, we'll take you there now. And they take him to a stone or a wooden door, beautifully carved wooden door. And the man reaches out to open it, and it's locked. And he looks back at the monks that are giggling. Most people don't know monks have a wicked sense of humor, and they hand him the key. And he unlocks the door. And behind that door, he finds a door made of stone. And so he unlocks that door, and behind that door is a door of silver. So he unlocks the door of silver, and behind the door of silver, he finds a door of solid ruby. And behind the door of solid ruby, there's another one, and so it goes until he's gone through doors of topaz and amethyst and gold and diamond. And finally, he gets to the door, and he puts the last key in the last door, and he opens it. And behind the door is the most beautiful sight he has ever seen. I can't tell you all what it is because you're not monks. You can go start counting now. But see, the point of the whole thing is that it is not about the end of the journey. It's not about knowing what the answer is. So often when we focus on a spiritual journey, what we end up focusing on is that moment when we attain our enlightenment. We focus on that moment when, we'll get it, everything will be perfect from that point on. And when we do that, we miss the whole point of the journey, which is to truly know and understand God. The point of our spiritual journey isn't attaining enlightenment. Remember, the point of our journey is to express the divine into our world. Enlightenment is the little bonus that comes along with it. So I have a challenge for all of us. Because what I know is that we are a people who, individuals, as a community, and quite frankly, as a nation, are at a point where we have a desire to go deeper in our understanding of what Spirit is and how Spirit works in our life. And it has been my belief and my experience that we attain that when we spend time in silence. So a lot of times you'll hear a minister go, oh, I'm going to invite you to spend the next few days sitting in silent meditation, or I'm going to invite you to try this. I'm not inviting you to do anything. I'm going to challenge you to do it. Partly because I know there are a few of you out there that when you hear me go challenge, go, I'm going to do that and show you wrong. So I'm challenging you to do this. I'm challenging you to spend a portion of the next 30 days in silent meditation. This is not prayer time. This is not reciting affirmations. This is not beseeching God for things. This is time in the silence, listening to what it is that Spirit is trying to tell you. And then, in addition to just the listening, I'm going to challenge you to go out and do it, to take action based off of the guidance that you receive. Remember, there are 5 basic principles that Unity teaches. Come to the class on Wednesday night, and we're going to cover all of them. But for right now, know that the 5th principle is that it is not enough to know the truth. You have to live the truth. It's not enough to just get the inspiration from the divine. You have to take action. And so I'm going to invite you and challenge you to take that action, to share it with one another, to share your stories, not in any sort of formal way. You don't have to email in to us or post it on Facebook. You can, but just informally when we're over there having soup on a Sunday. Share about what you've been guided to do. I'm going to do that right along with you. Now, I also know that there's probably a few of you out here that are going, I already spend time in silence. Double it. Your journey is about progressing. If you spend 5 minutes, spend 10. If you spend 10, spend 20, 40. There is no such thing as too much time in the silence. So I'm going to wish you luck over the next 30 days, because here's what I know. Spirit is going to speak loudly, and it's going to speak boldly through a lot of you. There's going to be part of you that's going to go, I can't do that. Yes, you can. There's going to be part of you that's going to go, it's easier if I stay right here. No, it isn't. Listen to what the divine is telling you to do, and then do it. And know that all the while, the fullness of Unity Village Chapel, the entirety of this community, is here to support you. And it is our joy to do so. And so God bless you all on your journeys, especially over the next 30 days.